So recently I came back from a 6-week trip across Asia, so I decided to show you what was in my bag for that trip, because that's apparently a thing people do on YouTube. So whenever I'm flying or traveling with camera gear, I actually normally bring 2 bags with me. The first bag is this one here, which is a Tenba DNA Messenger 13. This is the DSLR version, and I use this bag as my personal item in carry-on on flights, and during the trip it's my day bag. Now the reason I really like using this bag is because it's really easy to get the camera in and out of compared to a backpack, which I've traveled with before. Now the reason I like this bag in particular is because it's quite spacious on the inside while being small enough to fit under the seat in front of you in a plane. Although I've never actually had to do that. They've always let me put it in the overhead bin, or I just put it up there and nobody says anything. But the real trick with this bag is that first of all, it's really easy to undo, but instead of having normal Velcro and being super noisy, you just pull it down and it opens much quieter. So the second bag I bring with me is my Lowepro ProTactic 350 AW version 2, which is this nice black backpack here. And this becomes my sort of professional photography bag when I'm traveling. So this contains all of the camera gear, or most of the camera gear when I'm flying and stuff, because it's easy to transport all your gear in a backpack. If I'm getting trains or going from hotel to hotel, this bag is much easier to just carry around on your back. The reason I like this bag is because it becomes the professional photo bag. Okay, so what I mean by that is if I'm going out to take a specific shot where I want to bring, you know, the tripod on the side, particular camera, maybe some different filters, a few different lenses, I will actually bring this bag because it's much easier to bring a lot of camera gear around in a bag like this. So for example, when I was shooting Osaka Castle, or when I was in Kyoto photographing the pagoda in Gion, this is the bag I had for when I went out to take a specific photo. The messenger bag is much better for just sort of walk around snapshotting when you're just, you know, visiting tourist sites and cool locations and you want to just take your camera out and take a quick snapshot, or God forbid, a selfie, or if you want to just take a quick film photo with your walkabout camera, which you'll see in a bit. Now when I'm flying, I actually bring both of these bags as carry-on. I've never had anyone say anything about it, and I just check in my suitcase. Now before we get into the bags, I want to talk a little bit about the tripod. So this is my main travel tripod. It's a Peak Design tripod legs with the adapter plate that lets you put any tripod head on it. And then I've got a cheap leveling base and a nice 2-way geared head. Although one of the handle shafts is actually bent, but it still works fine. But this got bent somehow when my bag was being thrown around in check-in. I noticed this when I got to Hong Kong, so either in Dublin or Amsterdam, somebody obviously yeeted my suitcase and bent the quite strong looking turning handle, but still works. So I am actually looking for a replacement head for this because I really do like these legs, but I'm having a lot of trouble finding it. I'm looking for something with a leveling bowl of some kind and then a 2-way pan tilt head, not a fluid head, but just a normal kind of 2-way head, because this geared one is actually quite heavy and it's a little annoying, but I don't know. I'm looking at options. It'll take me like 6 months to actually pull the trigger on something because that's how long it usually takes me. So taking a look inside of my sort of, you know, carry-on bag, even though they're both carry-on, but let's take a look inside this. So in here, this is my traveling kit when I'm flying. So first up, we've got the Nikon Z30, which is arguably my favorite new camera for just videoing and traveling. It's such a good little camera. It's APS-C, it's really nice because it allows you to shoot kind of everything you want without needing to haul a bigger camera, and when you're traveling, size and weight is everything. I really like this because it has a flippy screen, it has really good microphones on the top, so if you're out shooting and you just want some ambient sound and you don't want it to have that horrible in-camera sort of tinny sound from the in-camera mics, these mics actually work really well, and then it comes with this, you know, little cat, you know, dead cat earmuff thingy-me-doodle. And the lens I'm using is the 12-28 power zoom lens from Nikon. It actually works really well on this camera. It doesn't extend. The power zoom function is great for video. It is a little bit of a slower lens, but honestly I don't really mind too much. You know, f3.5 is okay, Most of the time you have to use a variable ND filter on the camera anyway in order to reduce your exposure or control the exposure better for video. I'm just using a KNF concept filter. This is the ND2 to 32 variable ND Nano X Triple X Special. I don't even know what they call it, but that's the filter I'm using. Has this nice tab here for adjusting your exposure easy. Now while the PZ lens has vibration reduction inside, the camera does not have any IBIS system, and that is the one thing I wish this camera had more than anything. These are my noise cancelling headphones. I travel absolutely everywhere with these. These are the Bose Quiet Comfort 45s. I'm at the stage of traveling with these that if I was at an airport and I actually forgotten these headphones or lost them, I just buy a new pair in the airport before the flight because they're just that goddamn nice to travel with. I also have the Quiet Comfort earbuds as well. I got these fairly recently, and these are actually a great addition because they're small, they fit in your pocket, and they're comfortable enough for short bus trips, metro trips. When you're taking a bus 1 hour up to a lake and you don't want to haul the bigger headphone case, you can just pop these in your pocket and they're good to go. I bring some film with me, and normally this isn't actually in here. Normally I have a Ziploc bag full of film wedged down in between the two sections. I just take that out with security and have them hand check my film if they want to. Although I haven't had any issues with not getting film hand checked recently. I also bring a power bank in here. This is for when I'm flying. This normally just ends up in my suitcase once I arrive somewhere. This is a big heavy power bank, and it was one of the only ones I could find that had a Type-C port with the 15 volt 3 amp output that I needed to charge my Surface tablet, which is also in here. It's just a really nice tablet to have, even though this particular one is kind of beat up and in absolute pieces, but it still works fine. It's about 5 years old now. And one nice thing about this is that it is a full Windows machine, so I can install something like DaVinci Resolve and Photoshop on it. But what I actually use it for when I'm traveling is I use it to transfer photos and video files from the SD cards in the camera, or the CF Express cards in the case of the Nikon cameras, onto external SSDs, so I can back up my trip as I go along so I don't lose any data. In the front here I travel with a pile of little SSDs. This is a 2 terabyte T7. This is a T5 1 terabyte. This one is actually an enclosure for an NVMe drive, so you can just pop it out. 2 terabytes is barely enough for a long trip like that, and with certain camera upgrades, it ain't going to be enough in the future, let's put it that way. So in the main photo bag, so one of my favorite features of this bag is the fact that it's a rear opening bag, which means that it's basically impossible for someone to just open your bag and nick your shiz while you're traveling. In here we have the cameras that I started the trip with, even though this lens was purchased during the trip. So to start off, the main digital camera I used for the first half of the trip was the Nikon D850 with the 24 to 120 f4G lens. The lens is showing its age a little bit. In a few of my pictures there's some issues with really bright lights in the scene kind of flaring out compared to the newer version on the Z mount. But if you want to get into the F mount, should be your first lens that you buy, because it's so useful. It's such a great lens for traveling, f4 constant aperture, good focal length range, and it's got VR and it works. The D850, of course, the greatest DSLR ever made, for stills anyway. For video, it's absolutely pants. But yeah, D850, great camera for stills and traveling around. I used this for the first half of the trip. So the second lens that I brought with me is the 50mm f1.8G. So whenever I'm traveling anywhere, I always bring a fast 50 or a 35. It's just a really nice focal length to have like night shots or street shots in the evening, and it works. Other things we have in here, I brought the FTZ version 2, which will become obvious once I show you something else that I got on the trip. Other things I always bring with me, multi-port hubs for USB, short USB cables, really high quality card reader for reading CF Express cards, for copying stuff to the SSD, spare ENEL 15 batteries, spare battery for the Z30. Here we've got like cleaning cloths, blowers, filters, all the usual sort of travel gear. I really do try to travel as light as I can, because hauling around a big heavy bag full of camera gear is a pain in the cockles. As for film, you can probably guess what camera I used. I got the G1 exactly for this purpose, and it worked absolutely delightfully over the course of the trip. So I shot 17 rolls of film on this trip over 6 weeks. Contax G1, it didn't miss a single beat the whole trip. A few of the pictures were a little out of focus, mostly because of my bad operation, or I was like trying to focus on like a bug on a leaf or something on this, this is just not capable of doing. I also shot a lot of landscapes on this, which actually all of them turned out pretty good. Very few of them were underexposed. I just used the internal metering, and then for reciprocity I just like cranked up the exposure compensation dial. But yeah, the G1, great camera while I was traveling, and that's because it's basically an interchangeable lens point and shoot. Now when you're traveling around Asia, particularly Hong Kong or Taiwan and Taipei, or Japan in particular Tokyo, you do have a tendency to pick up camera gear as you're traveling. And I had actually planned for this, and I'd planned to buy multiple lenses and bits of gear as I was traveling around. So the first piece of gear that I bought, and this was in Hong Kong, is the Contax 28mm Biogon lens for the G1. And when I put this on in Hong Kong on like day 2, it basically stayed glued to the G1 for the entire trip. And I have to say, this is my first ever 28mm lens, and I love it. It produced amazing images, but the 28mm focal length is just such a nice focal length to work with. So I'm currently trying to figure out which 28mm to buy for my Nikon kit, because I really want a 28mm prime for the F-mount. Once I got to Japan, I had a few days in Tokyo at the start of the trip, and I actually scheduled this in for one reason, and that was to scour the entire city to try and find, and then find, a Nikon Z8. So I was actually incredibly fortunate to just be able to walk into a shop and buy this. I spent the better part of a day going through about 10 different Yodobashi and Bic camera stores scattered all around the Yamanote line in Tokyo, which is the green circle line. And eventually, in Bic Camera Shinjuku, the one in the Odaku building, they had just one Z8 in stock right here. And I actually got to buy this 2 days before Nikon announced a stop sell on these cameras because of the strap lug issue. So once I got the camera, I used it for the rest of the trip. This is why I had the F to Z, so I could use some of my f-mount lenses that I brought with me. And I shot all my stills and video on this for the rest of the trip, and they look delightful. So another piece of gear I bought is the 24mm PCE lens. This is Nikon's tilt shift lens. Now I've actually modified this one where you take the back off and rotate it 90 degrees so that the tilt and shift axes are aligned rather than being perpendicular to each other, because you can't change the angle of the tilt axis. But yeah, I bought this about halfway through the trip when I got trapped in Tokyo due to the typhoon blocking the Shinkansen to Osaka, and I used it for the rest of the trip, and it turns out that this was a really good lens to buy. And having a tilt shift lens when you're traveling and doing cityscapes is just straight up invaluable. Also at the end of the trip, I picked up this, which is a 70-200 2.8 G2 VR. So the reason I bought this is because it is the last 70-200 2.8 that will work on the F6. Honestly, I'm an amateur guy buying used gear. I don't need to buy the latest and greatest. This thing was like 480 euros in Fujiya camera in Nagano in Tokyo. So not a bad price for a used piece of pro gear. I know it has issues, and I know the focus motor will probably just explode on me, but I should be able to get some use out of it, and for 400 quid you can't really go wrong for something of this quality. That's really it. I did pick up, a few other little small bits. They'll get their own video in the future. And that's it for the gear I used on my Japan trip. Obviously some of it didn't come with me and came home with me, but that's it.